My name is Jerry Mears. I'm a member of the Civil War Heritage Foundation, and I'm going to be talking about one of General James Longstreet's inner circle of staff officers. So with the hat on, I'm going to become the person I portray, which is John Walter Fairfax. He was a major at Gettysburg on the inner circle of the staff of James Longstreet, Lieutenant General commanding 1st Corps, Army of Northern Virginia. So at Gettysburg, I was kept, of course, quite busy, as were all the staff. But let me back up a little bit. Before that, on June 28, 1863, which happened to be my 35th birthday, by the way, Henry Thomas Harrison, who was General Longstreet's paid scout, comes into camp with some rather surprising news. And the news is that the Army of the Potomac is no longer in Virginia, but is now moved up into Maryland, around the Frederick, Maryland area, and is marching hard for the Chambersburg, Gettysburg area of Pennsylvania. So we've heard nothing from General Stuart for several days. So this is the first somewhat intelligence that we have had of what our enemy army has been doing. So General Longstreet asked Lieutenant Colonel Moxley Chevelle, who was his chief adjutant, to send Harrison to General Lee. And so Moxley turns to me, and he says, "Major, I need you to go take Mr. Harrison to General Lee and make sure that he talks to the general, commanding general, and gives him the same information that he just gave General Longstreet." So I take Mr. Harrison to General Lee. I go in, I request an audience with the general, with Colonel Taylor. And so General Lee has me come in and I speak with him for a few minutes. I give him the information that we have some word on where the Army of the Potomac is. And his first reaction, of course, is, "Oh, you've heard from General Stuart." And we go, "No, sir, we have not yet heard from General Stuart." However, General Longstreet has a scout that he had sent out who just reported in, and he does have some information about the Army of the Potomac. "A scout, you say?" General Lee said to me. "Yes, sir." Meaning a spy? "Well, yeah, you could say that, sir. Can we trust the man?" I said, "Well, sir, General Longstreet is of the same opinion. It'd be nice to have General Stuart giving you the information you need, but in the absence of General Stuart, this is the only information we have." So General Lee agrees to see Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison gives him the same information he told General Longstreet. So after that meeting, General Lee called me back in. He thanked me. And of course, "Please present my compliment to General Longstreet. Tell General Longstreet he will receive orders shortly." The orders that went out from the commanding general of the Army of Northern Virginia was to order a concentration of all the available components of the Army of Northern Virginia between the Casstown and Gettysburg area. So a few days later, morning of July 1st, Ambrose Powell Hill's 3rd Corps is marching on the Chambersburg Pike between, I would say, Fayetteville, near Chambersburg, down towards Casstown. And the entire two divisions of the 1st Corps are behind. So as we're moving towards Casstown, all of a sudden we hear the faint rumble of what we immediately recognize as artillery. And we look at the general looks at us, and he says, "I'm riding ahead to find General Lee." So what happens is, after that, word comes back that I had to send an order to General Alfred McLaws, who was one of the division commanders in the 2nd Corps, that he had to hold his division up from marching on the Chambersburg Turnpike so that General Richard Anderson's division of the 3rd Corps, so the wagon train for that division, could proceed. And by this time, it's no mistake, that is the rumble of artillery we are hearing. And when you hear artillery, that generally means that there's some sort of fighting going on. General McLaws, of course, wants to push his division forward. So he was not very happy when I gave him the order from General Longstreet, you have to hold your division, General. So anyway, so we eventually do make it toward Gettysburg. The closer we get to Cashtown, the more we hear the sounds of fighting. And General Longstreet finally meets up with General Lee on the slopes of Seminary Ridge near the Lutheran Seminary. And they get into a conversation. And we can tell from General Longstreet's body language and his gestures and everything that he's having a rather vigorous discussion with the commanding general. And he's not too happy about what he's hearing. In fact, when he does come back to us, he's in somewhat of a foul mood, so we pretty much leave him be. The morning of July 2nd, bright and early, he's up. He has a meeting with General Lee on Seminary Ridge. The rest of the inner circle of the staff that were needed, Colonel Sorrell, myself, Major Latrobe, a few of the other aides-de-camp, and we find that Major Clark, who is the engineer just assigned to the Corps as the chief engineer, has been ordered to make a reconnaissance around the flank of the Army of the Potomac on Cemetery Ridge, find where their flank is. It takes several hours, and we're waiting. So finally, Major Clark, with the Army Chief Engineer, report back. They tell General Lee that they think they found the flank of the Army of the Potomac. Excuse me. My mouth's getting a little dry. Hold on a second. Got to pull out my flask of whiskey for medicinal purposes. Good whiskey. Oh, and by the way, I'm celebrated in the entire staff officers of the entire Army as being a celebrated whiskey drinker. Celebrated bon vivant. Thank you. Celebrated bon vivant, and also a celebrated horse breeder before the war. So anyway, back to what I was saying. So the morning of the 2nd, they come back. They report that they found the flank of the Army of the Potomac, and within a few hours we get orders. General Longstreet is to take the 2 divisions of his corps that are on hand. General Pickett's division is still back at Chambersburg, guarding the rear of the Army, and he's expected to arrive sometime later in the day or the early evening. So by early afternoon, General McLaws' division in the front, General Hood's division following behind, we start our march down a narrow country road. We get to a certain point, and right on top of this little rise, everybody stops because they can see Little Round Top in the distance. And on top of Little Round Top, in the part that we could clearly see, is a Yankee signal station. And we realized, whoa, if we can see them, they can see us. And if they can see us, they're going to send a signal to the commander of the Army of the Potomac. Not a good idea. So the entire 2 divisions have to somehow get turned back around, head back the way we came, and General Longstreet is already quite frustrated and impatient with the way things are going. And he is even in a worse mood than he was the day before. Finally, to make a long story short, we do get both divisions where they're supposed to be. General McLaws' division comes up first, deploys down on the extension of Seminary Ridge near the Peace Orchard. General Hood's division starts to file behind General McLaws' division and deploy down across Emmitsburg Avenue, Emmitsburg Road, and extend down a little bit further. And while we're waiting, we don't hear the guns. So finally, General Longstreet says, go to General Hood. He sends Major Latrobe, go to General Hood and find out why he has not yet started his attack. Major Latrobe comes back and says, General Hood is telling us that he thinks he's found a better way to get around the Yankee flank. Longstreet says, Fairfax, go to General Hood, tell him he must attack at once as ordered. I write out to General Hood. I tell him General Longstreet wants you to attack, General. Well, General Hood is still pressing his point. He said, now, Major, you see those two rocky hills over yonder? Yes, sir. Well, if we can somehow get behind them or through them, we can come up in the rear of the flank of the Union Army. Sounds like a reasonable plan to me. I go riding back to General Longstreet and I tell him basically the same thing Major Latrobe told him. Well, at this point, he said, that's it. He goes riding out personally to General Hood. We follow him, as we're supposed to, and they get into it. And they're having this discussion, and they're pointing different directions and everything. And finally, I hear General Hood say rather loudly, I will obey the order, General, but I do so under protest. Well, a little bit during that, we're right about where the junction of the Texas Brigade and General Evander Law's Alabama Brigade, and the 4th Alabama Regiment isn't too far from where I'm sitting on my horse. So I hear one of the boys in the 4th Alabama, they're all laying down waiting for the attack order. I hear him say rather loudly to some of his comrades, well, boys, there's old Fairfax, Longstreet's fighting adjutant, and we never see him unless there's going to be a battle, and there is going to be one real soon, and that's a sure bet. Well, that's exactly what happened. The order is given, General Hood goes in, the attack develops, General McLaws sends his brigade in, and before you know it, the entire salient from the two Rocky Mountains, the heights that we saw, all the way to the Peach Orchard is aflame with smoke and fire and explosions and everything else. The attack goes fairly well for us. In fact, we pretty much wrecked the entire 3rd Corps of the Army of the Potomac, and we also messed up a couple of other Union corps rather significantly. That evening, due to the number of Union prisoners we captured, I get detailed by Colonel Sorrell to start writing out the parole papers. And a parole is a form that a captured soldier or officer would take, promising that they would not take up arms against the Confederate States until properly exchanged. And there was a general order from the United States Army War Department that under no circumstances were any Union soldier or Union officer to accept our parole. But we got about 1,000 to 1,100 or 1,200 or so of our prisoners to take just the thing. It kept me up most of the night. So finally we got them. That was about 1,200 prisoners we didn't have to worry about feeding. We only had about 4,000 or so we had to worry about feeding in addition to our own people. So the next morning, of course, we hear that Pickett's division is up. General Lee sends for General Longstreet again. We ride up with him. They have the meeting. And the result of that meeting is General Longstreet's been put in charge of the assault on the Union Center. General Lee is convinced that because of our attacks over the previous 2 days, the Army of the Potomac has strengthened its right flank and its left flank. Therefore, the center must be weaker. So General Longstreet is put in charge of not only Pickett's division, which was up and fresh, but also put in charge of 2 of the divisions from A.P. Hill's 3rd Corps. He tried to suggest, well, since most of the divisions are coming from General A.P. Hill, shouldn't General Hill be the one to lead the assault? Well, General Lee doesn't like that idea. So General Longstreet is in command of the assault. He sends us as staff officers to help coordinate, make sure everything goes according to plan. When the attack steps off after the tremendous bombardment, something like 150 guns on our side, that Colonel Alexander was in charge of, the boys step off. And as they step off, our duties as staff officers were to coordinate with the different brigades and the different of the divisions to make sure that they were reaching their assigned points of advance and that they understood that they all had to coordinate at a certain point. Needless to say, the attack fails. And then the night of July the 4th, in a tremendous thunderstorm, rainstorm, it is coming down in buckets. We start our retreat from Seminary Ridge that we had withdrawn to. back to hers ridge, we start our retreat back toward Maryland and ultimately Virginia. So that's pretty much what I did during the Battle of Gettysburg. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to try and answer them to the best of my ability.
Did you ever catch up with General Stewart?
General Stewart did eventually report in on the late afternoon, I heard, of July 2nd, and bringing something like 120 wagons with him. And the Army scuttlebutt, again among the staff, was that General Lee supposedly said, well, that's all well and very good, General Stewart, but these wagons are absolutely no good to us now. And I understand from some of General Lee's own personal staff that there was a private meeting between General Stewart and General Lee, and while nobody really heard what went on, some of them said, well, they heard Marsh Robert Teresa's voice a few times, so I think he was a bit upset. Any other questions? Ma'am?
Did A.P. Hill, did he have any influence on the fact that Stewart left when he did?
I'm sorry, on Stewart?
Mm-hmm.
Not that I know. My understanding was that General Stewart was supposed to screen the Army as it moves from Virginia up into Maryland, up into Pennsylvania, and pretty much staying on the right side of the entire Army as we advance.
Right.
He did do that to some extent while we were in Virginia, but then he gets that notion into his head about, oh, well, I'm going to go, another one of my expeditions, and what happened was during the Battle of Brandy Station, after the Battle of Brandy Station, in the Southern press, he gets a bit of, shall we say, heavy criticism. So he felt he had to do something to restore his reputation, if you will. Unfortunately, by doing so, he left us blind when we needed it the most. That's not to say the Army did not have cavalry with it. However, the cavalry he assigned were not the ones that he particularly trusted, General Stewart that is, and General Lee was so used to General Stewart personally giving him the intelligence he needed.
But you talked about down at Brandy Station where this kind of all culminated in the...
Well, I understand that General Stewart came basically within a hair's breadth of being captured himself.
Right.
So, it was pretty serious. Any other questions? If not, I thank you very much.
Good job. Good job, Jerry.